Hi, my name is Charley Young, and I am an interdisciplinary artist. I'm creating drawings that look at fragmented vantages of mountains. I grew up spending most of my summers hiking and climbing in the Rocky Mountains of Alberta. Both of my parents are really active mountaineers, and as a child, my brothers and I, we would be forced to kind of go with our parents and backpack into backcountry huts and, traverse glaciers and go rock climbing with them. Now I've started to see how that has really informed the work that I make and the experience that I'm hoping to establish for the viewer. So for recent works, I have been focusing on taking helicopter travels and flying through the Rocky Mountains with my camera and trying to collect as many photographs as I possibly can. Then I use those for the basis of the drawings. I try to do them in the winter because I just like how the snow clings to the rock face a little bit more so in that season. But for me, traveling in the helicopter was really important in terms of establishing a different sort of perspective of the mountains. I wanted to see them not from the ground, but from the air. And I wanted to be able to see them with a greater proximity and sort of see them in a bit more of an abstracted way. So seeing them in just the patterning on the rock faces, the relationship between white and black of the scree slope and the rock and the snow. I've always been interested in artists as explorers because I think that's what we are in the studio, but I see that as being paralleled in a site-specific practice like mine. Or a site-based practice like mine. So in terms of my process, I am taking photographs and I often use parts of photographs that become incorporated into the drawing. So I will lay them underneath my drafting film and sort of start by tracing them or outlining different parts of the composition. And then I work with a couple of different materials. So predominantly I use graphite. So I use different kinds of graphite mechanical pencils, and I use graphite sticks oftentimes. So this is the work on the front side. So all of the graphite is done on the front side of the work. And I work on top of drafting film. And then there's white watercolor pencil crayon on the back side. Typically when I'm drawing, I'm just trying to capture as much information and as much detail as possible within the work. So trying to capture some of the trees. I'm really interested in capturing the tree line currently. Oops. So I wrap shop towel around some of my tools, around some of my drawing tools, my pencils, just because my hands get kind of sore, and some of the pencils are really fine and they become a bit harder for me to hold. As you can imagine, these drawings take hours and hours and hours. Drafting film is very sensitive, so I have to be super careful about the kind of interaction I have with it. So I use these little blue shop towels. Part of the reason why I'm using drafting film actually is because it's a very sensitive material, and I feel like that sort of parallels the environment that I'm referencing. I think one of the things I like about drafting film is that you can work on it additively, but you can also work on it subtractively. So moving my hand across the surface of the drawing, adding marks, but then simultaneously kind of removing marks as my hand moved from right to left across my drawing. This is based on my most recent travel via helicopter through the Rocky Mountains. So this is actually the backside of Mount Rundle, and then you see the river kind of down below. And I've become far more interested in sort of the subtleties of a tree slope. And that's what I'm depicting here, is sort of where the tree line merges into the top of the mountain. And I really love these moments where you have these little avalanche slopes where some of the trees have been taken out by avalanches, and you just have these little trails and these little valleys that kind of cut through or disrupt that tree line. So sometimes I just leave certain parts of the composition as just a suggestion. So just the top of the summit here is somewhat defined, but it's not really full and it's not really solid. And I want people to imagine that. I don't want to give them the full story. I just want to give them kind of parts of the puzzle and then have them see the rest or imagine the rest. There's this idea of conquering with reaching a summit, and for me, I don't totally identify with that. I think the vantage from a summit can be incredibly beautiful, but I don't like this idea of man overcoming nature. I think for me it's more kind of genuine and more sweet than that. It's kind of working in harmony with nature or sharing something with nature. I think the mountains, they can be so seductive because they're really beautiful, but they are a really harsh environment. There's a certain kind of presence of death, I feel like, within the mountains. Your life is kind of at stake sometimes, especially my father is a very active mountaineer and he does some pretty serious climbing, and you know, he's had family and friends who have died on the mountains. So I see them almost as being kind of this threshold between life and death. I guess I do see them as tombs a little bit, where they're these big monolithic landscapes, but with these really hard histories. I think the drawings are very, they're at first glance, I think, very beautiful to take in, but then they are very sorrowful at the same time. I think you're looking at a landscape that is eroding. You're not seeing the full environment. But when we think about how we move through the mountains, it's there's this fine kind of threshold between life and death. So it's from Henry David Thoreau, and he writes, "To the traveler, a mountain outline varies with every step. It has an infinite number of profiles, though absolutely but one form." And I think about that quite often in terms of my drawings, because I often draw the same mountain, but you would never know that it's the same mountain because I'm drawing it from a different perspective every single time, or I'm cropping more closely in on a particular part, or I'm seeing it from a bit of a different vantage, or I'm highlighting a certain part. But I just like this idea that to the traveler, a mountain outline varies with every step, like it's changing every single step that you're making.